I woke up to find that every car on my street had its tires slashed, except for one. When I brought it up at a neighborhood meeting, someone quickly snapped, "Why are you pointing fingers?" So, I showed the security footage I had quietly recorded. The entire room fell silent. Then their own spouse stood up and asked, "What did you do?" I live in a peaceful neighborhood in Fort Worth, Texas. The kind of place where people mow their lawns on Saturdays, children ride their bikes around the cul-de-sac, and you wave at your neighbors even if you don't know their names. Nothing unusual ever happens here. At least that's what I used to believe. One morning I stepped outside to leave for work and immediately felt like I had walked onto the set of a disaster movie. Car alarms were going off. People were yelling. Some were just standing still, staring at their cars in disbelief. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing, but when I did, my stomach sank. Every single car on the street had its tires slashed. Every one. Except one. That untouched car belonged to Chris and Hannah, a couple who had moved in about 2 years ago. Chris was out there with the rest of us, rubbing his chin, shaking his head, and mumbling to himself like he was just as shocked. But I was watching him closely, and something didn't feel right. While everyone else was panicking, calling their insurance companies and pacing up and down their driveways, Chris seemed like he was putting on a show. His expressions were overly dramatic, like he was trying too hard to look concerned. He kept saying things like, "Man, this is crazy," and "I can't believe this happened." He even added, "Must have been some punk kids messing around." And every time someone passed by his completely untouched car, he quickly said, "Man, I guess we just got lucky, huh?" It sounded like he was trying to cover himself in advance. That's when I had an idea. What nobody knew was that I had installed a small security camera about a month earlier. My car had been broken into before, and I figured a little extra protection couldn't hurt. The camera was discreet, mounted in a spot where no one would notice unless they were really looking for it. And right now, it might be the most valuable thing on this entire street. I didn't say anything. I quietly went back inside, locked the door, and opened the footage. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the night's recordings. After a few minutes, I found the exact time, and my heart nearly stopped. It was Chris. At 2:38 a.m., he was outside, dressed in all black, holding a knife. He moved quickly, slashing each tire with smooth, practiced motions, barely pausing. He had a plan. He slashed both the driver's and passenger's side tires on most cars. He even paused occasionally to look around and make sure no one was watching. But the whole time, he carefully avoided his own car. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. This man had the audacity to stand with the rest of us, pretending to be a victim, shaking his head, acting shocked and saying things like, "What a shame," while fully knowing he was the one who did it. I didn't know his reason yet, but I knew the truth. I was going to find out the truth. The neighborhood decided to hold an emergency meeting that evening in Mr. Dawson's garage. People were furious. No one felt safe knowing a vandal had damaged all our cars during the night. Everyone had their own theory. Some believed it was a group of bored teenagers. Others thought it was something personal. Maybe someone holding a grudge against our street. Chris. He was very outspoken. "This is a shame," he said, shaking his head like a preacher giving a sermon. "You work hard, pay your bills, and this is what happens. Some people have no respect." He sighed dramatically. "But we shouldn't start blaming people without proof." Smiled. "Actually, I have some footage," I said. The room went quiet. Chris tensed up just for a moment, but I saw it. I pulled up the video on my phone and mirrored it to the TV. As soon as Chris appeared on screen, slashing his first tire, people gasped. Someone whispered, "No way." Mr. Dawson swore under his breath. A woman in the back covered her mouth with both hands. Chris stood there, frozen, staring at the screen. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Then, from across the room, Hannah stood up. She turned to Chris, her face pale, her voice shaking. "What did you do?" Chris didn't respond. He stood still, shoulders tight, fists clenched at his sides. His face turned red in seconds, like his body was stuck between panic and anger. The rest of the room wasn't waiting for answers. "You did this," someone yelled. "You slashed our tires." Mr. Dawson stepped forward, growling. "Are you out of your mind?" Chris opened his mouth but couldn't speak. He looked at Hannah, hoping she'd defend him. But Hannah wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the TV screen, at her husband sneaking around in the dark, holding a knife. I expected her to start screaming, to lash out and expose him. But instead she did something that made everything even stranger. She turned, grabbed her purse, and walked straight out of the garage. Chris blinked, snapping out of his shock, and ran after her. "Hannah, wait. Where are you going?" She didn't answer. Now the whole neighborhood stood in silence, watching them disappear down the driveway. People began yelling over one another. "He needs to pay for this. We should call the police. What if he does something worse next time?" But I wasn't done. I needed to know why. I turned to the guy standing next to me, a younger man named Eric. "Do Chris and Hannah ever have problems?" "Yes." Eric frowned. "Not that I know of, but," he hesitated, "they did have one huge fight a few months ago. It got bad enough that someone called the cops. But Hannah told them it was just a misunderstanding." Something felt off. I pulled up the footage again, scrolling back a few minutes before the tire slashing. I hadn't checked what happened before 2:38 a.m., but now I was curious. Sure enough, I found something. At 2:24 a.m., Chris wasn't alone. He was arguing with a woman, not Hannah. I turned up the volume. The audio was muffled, but I caught parts of it. Woman: "Chris, you don't understand. I can't just." Chris: "You promised me." Woman: "Keep your voice down." Chris: "If you think you can just shut me up then." Then she stormed off. Chris stood there for a few seconds, breathing heavily, hands on his head. Then, like something snapped, he pulled out a knife and started slashing tires. Holy, this wasn't just random vandalism. This was rage. And if I had to guess, Hannah had no idea. I needed to talk to her. I slipped out of the garage while everyone else was still arguing, and walked toward Chris and Hannah's house. The lights were on. Through the window, I saw them in the kitchen. Hannah was pacing, running her hands through her hair. Chris stood near the fridge, his back to her. I knocked. Hannah opened the door. For a second I thought she might slam it shut, but then she sighed and stepped aside. "What?" she asked. Pause. "I think there's more going on than we know." Her expression changed. She knew something. Before she could reply, Chris turned around. His face was dark and tense. His jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. "You should go home," he said flatly. I looked at Hannah. "Is there something you're not telling us?" Chris stepped closer. "I said go home." Held up my phone. "I saw the footage, Chris. All of it." For the first time, real fear appeared in his eyes. And Hannah, she didn't look surprised. She looked scared. Chris and I locked eyes. For a brief moment, I saw something beneath the anger: panic. He knew I had seen more than just the tire slashing. Something I wasn't supposed to. Hannah stepped between us. "I think you should leave," she said quickly, but her voice trembled. I ignored her. "Who is she, Chris?" Chris's body stiffened. He glanced at Hannah, then back at me. His jaw twitched. I thought he might hit me, right there in his own kitchen. Instead, he let out a bitter laugh. "You need to mind your own business." Hannah spun toward him so fast, he flinched. "Who is who?" She didn't know. Chris clenched his teeth. "Nobody." I stepped forward. "The woman you were arguing with. The one who walked off right before you lost it and slashed those tires." I turned my phone toward Hannah and tapped the screen. "You should see this." Chris lunged, not to hit me but to grab my phone. I pulled it back just in time. He stumbled forward, hitting the counter. Hannah grabbed his arm. "What is he talking about, Chris?" Chris didn't respond. His body trembled, not from anger but fear. Hannah turned to me. "Let me see." Chris spun around. "No." Hannah ignored him. She grabbed my wrist and pulled the phone toward her. I hit play. The kitchen fell silent, except for the quiet audio of the argument coming from the speakers. Hannah's face lost all color. She whispered, "I know that voice." Chris grabbed my arm. "Turn it off." Hannah wasn't listening. She snatched the phone from my hand and turned up the volume. Her breathing quickened. Then she whispered something that made my skin crawl. "That's my sister." And blinked. "What?" Chris slammed his fist on the counter. "Enough." His voice cracked. "You don't know what you're talking about." Hannah stepped back, shaking. "You swore to me," she said softly. "You swore you'd never talk to her again." Chris ran a hand over his face. His breathing quick and uneven. My thoughts were racing. I didn't know much about Hannah's family, just that she had a sister. I had never seen her or heard anyone mention her. And by the way Hannah was staring at Chris, it was serious. "You told me she left," she whispered. "You said she cut contact, that she moved out of state. You looked me in the eyes and swore, on my mother's grave, that she was gone." Chris stayed silent. Then Hannah's expression twisted. "You said she was dangerous. You said she was unstable. You told me she stole from us, that she couldn't be trusted." Chris backed away, his voice low. "She came to me, Hannah. She showed up out of nowhere," Chris said. Hannah's voice was sharp. "Why?" Chris hesitated. The silence between them grew heavy. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "She told me she's pregnant." The air seemed to change. Hannah stared at him, and I saw the moment she understood what he meant. He wasn't just talking about her sister showing up. He was talking about himself too. Chris was the father. Hannah let out a short, breathless laugh, one that held no amusement. "Oh my God!" Chris stepped forward. "It's not what you think," she screamed, cutting him off. "It's exactly what I think." Chris shook his head over and over, like he could somehow erase the truth. "She's lying, Hannah. She showed up last night saying all kinds of things, threatening to tell you." "Because it's true," Hannah shouted. She threw my phone back to me and shoved past Chris. He tried to grab her arm, but she pulled away so fast she nearly lost her balance. "Don't you touch me," she snapped. "You disgust me." Chris cracked. "You don't get it. She was going to ruin everything." His voice was wild, panicked. "She said she was going to tell you. Go to the neighbors. Expose everything. She was blackmailing me, Hannah. She wanted money. So you slashed everyone's tires." Hannah shouted. Chris froze. And in that second everything made sense. He hadn't destroyed the neighborhood's tires just out of anger. He did it because he needed a distraction. He wanted the neighbors to believe it was some random act of vandalism, something loud, something chaotic, something big enough to cover up what had really happened that night, that his mistress, Hannah's own sister, had come to confront him. He needed to hide the truth before Hannah found out. The kitchen went quiet. Then Hannah whispered something I never thought I'd hear. "Where is she now?" Chris didn't answer. And suddenly, I realized something. Chris had looked angry. He had looked panicked. He had looked scared. But not once did he look surprised. Because whatever happened after their argument, whatever made her storm out that night, she never actually left. Chris didn't answer. His face went blank, like his mind shut down to avoid the truth. But Hannah wasn't letting him escape it. She stepped forward slowly, each step like she was walking toward something she already knew would destroy her. "Where is she, Chris?" Chris took a sharp breath through his nose. "I don't know," he mumbled. Hannah's voice shook, but she stood firm. "You do know." I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. Everything in me was screaming that something was very wrong. Chris shut his eyes tight, shaking his head. "She left after we fought. I told her to go, and she left." But Hannah shook her head and stepped even closer. "I don't believe you." Chris's entire body was tense, every muscle stiff. He wasn't breathing right. He was falling apart. I looked at Hannah. We need to check your house. Chris's head whipped toward me. No, you don't. Hannah turned on him, her face cold. You don't get to tell me what I can or can't do in my own house. She stormed past him, heading straight for the back door. Chris chased after her. Hannah, stop. I didn't wait for permission. Followed them. Hannah yanked the back door open and stepped onto the porch. Then she froze. Chris crashed into her from behind, grabbing her arm. Hannah, listen to me. But she wasn't listening. She was staring at the shed in the backyard. Chris always kept it locked. He told the neighbors it was full of old tools and junk. But now something about it felt wrong. Hannah pulled her arm free and started walking toward it. Chris lunged after her, but I stepped in, shoving him back hard. He nearly fell. He spun toward me wild-eyed. Stay out of this. Like hell I will, I shot back. Hannah reached the shed. She grabbed the handle. It was locked. Chris made a desperate sound, somewhere between a growl and a plea. Hannah, don't. She turned and looked at him. Then, without a second of hesitation, she kicked the door in. It swung open with a loud crack. And the smell hit us immediately, rot, decay. Death. Hannah stumbled back, gasping. I pulled my shirt over my nose, heart pounding so hard it made me dizzy. Inside the shed, curled against the wall and half covered by a tarp, was her sister's body. Hannah screamed. Chris collapsed to his knees, his hands tangled in his hair. He rocked slightly like he was trying to disappear, and I just stood there, my stomach turning, trying to understand what I was looking at. The neighbors came running when they heard Hannah's scream. Within minutes, the yard was full. Some people gagged, some cried, some called the police. Chris didn't run. He just sat there shaking. When the cops arrived, everything became a blur. The flashing lights, the sirens, Hannah crying on the front lawn, Chris being pulled to his feet and handcuffed. His face was blank, like he wasn't even present anymore. The detective asked for my footage. I gave them my phone without question. They took Chris away in a police cruiser. Hannah watched, tears streaming silently down her face. She didn't say a word. Not when they carried her sister's body out of the shed. Not when they took her inside for questioning. Not even when neighbors tried to comfort her. She just stood there, trembling, staring at the ground. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my house, watching the footage over and over, trying to make sense of what happened. And eventually, the truth settled in. Chris didn't slash the tires out of rage. He did it because he needed a distraction. A crime big enough to get the neighborhood talking. A loud enough mess to keep everyone too busy to notice what was really hidden behind his house. A murder. A body left to rot in his shed. Hannah moved out 2 weeks later. I never saw her again. Chris was convicted of second-degree murder. Turns out her sister had come back to blackmail him after getting pregnant. He panicked. Things turned violent. And she died. Instead of calling the police, he hid the body. Then, realizing how suspicious her disappearance would look, he slashed the tires to create a bigger story. Smokescreen. And it nearly worked. Almost. I still live on the same street. The shed is gone now. Grass has grown over the dirt where her body was found. The neighbors still whisper about it. But like all things, even the worst nightmares fade with time. Some nights, when it's quiet and I'm walking to my car, I can still hear Hannah scream. And I don't think that sound will ever leave me.